Well, good evening, late afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight for President Ferry's last lecture. Of course, so many of us had the opportunity this morning to hear him in chapel, to preach his final chapel message. But now we get the opportunity maybe to hear a few more stories, maybe a little more history, and some final words that he wants to share with us as a Concordia community as he begins his final few weeks as president of Concordia University, Wisconsin, and Ann Arbor. What a remarkable journey. 24 years as president, 30 years as a part of the Concordia family, first as a professor, then as president, and most recently, these past 8 years as president of both Wisconsin and the Ann Arbor campuses. And so I know that there are those of us in the room, there are others that are watching on the live stream, that the last lecture will be delivered to those at Concordia, Wisconsin a little bit later this week. So we get first dibs on this, and again, what a blessing it is. So enjoy tonight, enjoy these words, enjoy these thoughts, and let's welcome again our president, the Reverend Dr. Pat Ferry.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks very much, and thanks for coming this evening. When they asked me if I would consider doing something like this, my first thought was, I don't know, okay, I'll do it. But if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to write a lecture, and it's kind of an old school lecture delivered in the old school way, but what would you expect from an old guy otherwise, huh? Nearly every public presentation that I have made over the last 24 years has included the university's mission statement as a point of reference, if not the central theme. So one more time for all the old times. Concordia is a Lutheran higher education community committed to helping students develop in mind, body, and spirit for service to Christ in the church and in the world. We're a Lutheran higher education community. My own experience with Lutheran higher education began, as so many of you know, as a student at St. John's College in Winfield, Kansas. And it was in that setting that I was exposed to Christian faith in a meaningful way for the first time in my own life, and it changed everything. And already in those days, I hoped that I could somehow stay closely connected to Lutheran higher education. Perhaps one day I dreamt maybe I could be a college professor. And I will even admit, once in a while thought, maybe even a college president. My next stop was Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I'm grateful for the theological education that I received at the seminary. I learned to think theologically, and that filter has been applied ever since. Upon graduation from the seminary, then I went to graduate school at the University of Colorado in Boulder, which was not Lutheran higher education, but nevertheless, it was a place where I learned to think as an historian would think. And so our education, if it has the intended impact, is something that shapes us. Without the experiences that I had in college, at the seminary, and graduate school, the direction of my own life would have been much different, and I would have been a very different person. For a few years before coming to Concordia, I was then the campus pastor at the University of Wyoming. And those few years in Laramie underscored that while I wanted to be at a place like Concordia and to teach history, what I wanted most of all was to connect faith and learning into the entirety of a college student's experience. In other words, I hope to be able to help to provide the same kind of experience that meant so much to me once upon a time as a college student. And then in 1991, I came to Concordia, where the nexus between faith and learning was built into the culture. In the classroom, themes that connected Christian faith and learning and our discipline were explored in depth. And then outside of the classroom, we paid attention to our students and their spiritual formation. And I wanted to be at a place where faculty and staff were not just looking for a way to make a living, but a place where they wanted to be to live out a life of service and Christian community. And while I had not died and gone to heaven, nobody who spends a few winters in Wisconsin will ever confuse the place for heaven. From the very beginning, I felt like Concordia was exactly the place that I wanted to be. Unlike a lot of pastor scholars, I never wanted to teach at a seminary. It didn't interest me at all. I mean, seminaries are finishing schools. The students tend all to be a lot alike, thinking the same way, pursuing the same kinds of interests and goals, certainly sharing the same Christian confession. And that they're great places for a theological education, great places for pastoral training, but teaching at a seminary just never really interested me. Instead, I wanted to be at a place where, as I heard one Christian college president describe it recently, a place where we are firm at the core, but soft on the edges. In other words, we hold fast to our confessional conviction without wavering, but we are mindful that we have a much more diverse student population than might have been true at Concordia once upon a time, where all of the students were LCMS Lutherans and most were preparing for church vocations, kind of a mini seminary. We want to connect Christian faith and learning for all of our students, no matter where each one might presently be in his or her life journey. These days, students who have grown up in the faith should find Concordia to be a place that reinforces their confirmed convictions. But, as another of my colleagues likes to point out, schools like ours are at the tip of the spear when it comes to Christian missions. There are a lot more students who come to Concordia who are like that unchurched kid from Jefferson High School who inexplicably found himself on a Lutheran college campus in the late 1970s, right? We want to reach them too. In my inaugural, now a long time ago, I quoted John Milton. He lived in a time of great upheaval in the 17th century in England following the Civil War. He addressed what one historian described as the world turned upside down in which he lived. And there were lots of ideas being bandied about politics and about society and about religious viewpoints, all of them competing for attention. Sound familiar? Sounds like our time. Anyway, Milton said something that was kind of startling in a time and place where there really wasn't a lot of tolerance for competing opinions. He said, "Let truth and falsehood grapple." Milton continued, "Whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter." Firm at the core, soft at the edges. Why not invite others into the sort of civil, not war, but civil discourse where we can learn from each other? Because truth isn't just hanging by a thread, right? Truth can withstand challenges. And beyond that, I'm a firm believer that questions push us farther than answers. Questions are important for growth. It's kind of hard to have meaningful discussions these days. Our own world is turned upside down. Ours should be a setting where we grapple with serious issues in a context where, soft on the edges, everybody is invited to participate. A Lutheran higher education community where students grow in mind, in body, in spirit. The mind. Make your mind an interesting place to spend the rest of your life. That's how I once heard the value of a liberal arts education. I think it's pretty good. In the home that Tammy and I have recently built in Texas, I made sure to create an interesting space for my library, right? Reading is an important way to stretch the mind. Of course, there's more than that. An educated person is a critical thinker, is a problem solver. An educated person writes with clear and effective prose and maybe even a little poetry. Speaks articulately, or at least coherently. An educated person argues convincingly, yet winsomely. An educated person appreciates beauty, the aesthetic of art, the beauty of music, nature, as well as the beauty of creative responses to kind of ugly situations sometimes. Indeed, an educated person figures out how to contribute meaningfully. The life of the mind is an active place to be. It is an active life. Also in the 17th century, across the channel, René Descartes from France, he was a scientist, a mathematician, a philosopher. He once said, "Writing makes an exact man." Right? Writing makes an exact man. That's why I wrote this lecture. I wanted it to say exactly what I had in mind. But Descartes also said, reading makes a full man. Right? Writing makes an exact, reading makes a full man or woman. And I think that's true. Reading expands the mind. So what am I reading right now? Well, not too long ago, Tammy and I watched the movie on Netflix, My Summer with Salinger. And as I watched it, it occurred to me that I had never read J.D. Salinger's The Catcher and the Rye, right? And I'm sort of embarrassed to admit that that's true, that I'd never read it before. So I don't like deficiencies in my education. Picked up a copy. I'm reading it now. I want to be a full person. Not too long ago either, I saw an interview on television, I think it was on Morning Joe while I was eating breakfast, an interview with Isabel Allende. She's a Chilean author. And I already had her first book in my library, La Casa de los Espíritus. And it was on my list, but after I heard her speak, I decided I better get going on it. So I'm also reading La Casa de los Espíritus, and I'm working my way through this one, reading in Spanish. And then I was visiting Barnes & Noble, which sometimes I do, on the hunt for something that would catch my attention, and I grabbed the new biography of James Monroe by the historian Timothy McGrath. I've read a lot of early American history, a lot of presidential biographies, never read one on James Monroe, so I'm filling in some gaps in my education on early America. One of my favorite authors is a guy by the name of Walter Isaacson. He teaches at Tulane. And recently, as Tammy and I were driving back from Texas, we heard a podcast on which he was discussing his latest book. And I've read some of his earlier books, his earlier biographies. He wrote one on Leonardo da Vinci, one on Benjamin Franklin, one on Albert Einstein, one on Steve Jobs. I haven't read that one, but I will. So, think about that. Da Vinci, Franklin, Einstein, Steve Jobs, right? He likes to focus on expansive thinkers whose contributions are really far-reaching. The new one, Codebreaker, is about Jennifer Doudna. Maybe you haven't heard of her. I hadn't. But her work is every bit as revolutionary as the other subjects that Isaacson has written about. Her work on RNA and the development of CRISPR deals with gene mapping and gene editing. And it was essential, her work, for the COVID vaccine. And it holds all kinds of promise for addressing other genetic problems. The same work that she has been doing also poses no shortage of potential ethical challenges, right? I mean, the mere term gene editing kind of sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it? Well, revolutions change things. That's not new. Einstein's work in physics helped forward the atomic revolution. Steve Jobs and others helped to launch the digital revolution. Doudna is part of an unfolding molecular revolution which will be at least as far-reaching as the others. Science has changed the world, but none of these revolutions, for all their benefits, have come without some fairly dire consequences, right? I have to admit, I have a long way to go to catch up for my lack of attention to science in my own learning journey. But this connection between scientific knowledge and its capacity and ethics, that intrigues me. None of what I'm reading may interest you at all. But at least for me, my mind is an interesting place. And certainly I read for pleasure, but I want to challenge my mind, to stretch my mind. I want to address gaping holes in my education. I want to grow. Mind, body, and spirit. I also want to challenge my body, because we're not just our brains, we're also our bodies. The idea of a healthy mind and a healthy body, that's not new. The ancient Greeks held up arete. That's the Greek word, arete, which is the pursuit of excellence. And as an educational ideal, it really has a lot of purposeful everyday life application. Arete is about living up to one's full potential. And for the Greeks, that meant the pursuit of knowledge, but also the use of physical faculties to bring about strength and bravery and courage and wit. And in order to live a life of arete for the Greeks, mind and body were essential. And so no wonder for them that athletics, the Olympiad, was so integral, not as spectators, but as participants. I'm an athlete. I don't say I was an athlete. I was a basketball player. I'm not anymore. I played at other sports too when I was a kid, not so much nowadays. Nevertheless, I am an athlete, which is much more about a way of being, a way of living, than any kind of preferred physical activity. I am a runner. I enjoy racing. I enjoy competing. Haven't had a lot of chance to do that lately. I did a 10K a few weeks ago, first race in over a year. Hopefully I'll run the Chicago Marathon in October. But being an athlete is not about how far or how fast you run. It's not how strong you are or how many push-ups you can do. I told you this morning I'm working on my push-ups, right? Being an athlete is about challenging your body to reach your potential. Not to be an Olympian like the ancient Greeks or in Tokyo this summer, but to be your own athlete and whatever that means for you and your own pursuit of excellence, arete. That includes training and diet and rest. It means taking care of your body and being health conscious. Though good health is really more of the happy byproduct of being an athlete than the goal. Good health is a means toward helping the body to achieve its full potential. Some are better athletes than others. I'm an older athlete. Not as good perhaps as I once was, but not yet as good as I hope to be. Right? I'm working on it. What's that old Toby Keith, not as good as I once was, good once as I ever was. Anyway, I'm working on it. But to one extent or another, we are all athletes as long as we inhabit our physical bodies. The only question is how much are we willing to challenge our bodies to reach full potential? I suppose it's the same question that we could ask about how much we're willing to challenge our minds. One thing is certain, we start where we are right now, not where we used to be, or where we would like to be, or where we think we ought to be. I cannot read Albert Camus' L'Étranger in French yet. But I'm working on it a little bit every day. I'll get there eventually. I told you this morning I could probably drop down And if you made me, I could probably do 100 push-ups. I know I could do 75 or 80. 6 months ago, I would have struggled to do 10. I've been working on it, a little each day. I could not run a marathon distance tomorrow the way that Ryan did yesterday, but by October, I will be ready. Or not. I know from the experience of my previous 25 completed marathons that it's a process. I'll get myself ready, and on race day, I will get what I'm ready for. You get what you get ready for, but you have to start somewhere. And that somewhere is where we are right now. But maybe arete doesn't interest you either. For me, challenging my mind and body to reach my potential a little bit each day is what my education has inspired. And it may all sound Greek to you, and that wouldn't be far from true. Develop in mind and body. The ideal of a healthy mind and a healthy body is a daily pursuit, just as it was for the ancient Greeks. And yet there's more. Spirit. Mind and body, it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. And another old man once wrote this to his young colleague: train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. That was from St. Paul to the young pastor Timothy. Maybe be a little overly critical, but not too far off the mark. We live in a time and a place in which our culture is intellectually weak. Our minds are mush. We avoid rigor. In preference, we seek fluff. Few people read anything anymore. We also live in a society that is physically weak, sedentary, always in search of the path of least resistance. Thinking is hard. Training is hard. Arete takes time. It takes effort. And yet, if we're intellectually and physically working from behind, in our world today, we are spiritually almost entirely bankrupt. There's almost nothing there, less than nothing. Spiritually destitute and antagonistic to boot. Train yourself to be godly. If people won't lift a finger to turn the page of a book or lift a rear end off the couch to go for a walk, I guess it's no surprise that so few would seek to be lifted up from spiritual complacency, from spiritual dormancy. The words disciple and discipline are obviously cognates. And I'm not going to take it as a given that everybody who is here at Concordia wants to be a disciple or a follower of Jesus. Of course, to me that is most regrettable. The absence of this relationship will invariably leave empty the spiritual void that is in a person's life. We are, after all, not just brains and bodies. We are spiritual beings, whether we like that or not. And folks will try to find all kinds of ways to fill that void. But as a disciple of Jesus, I believe that only Jesus can satisfy our profoundest longing. As St. Augustine famously said in his remarkable Confessions, our hearts are restless, Lord, until they rest in you. So perhaps what I'm about to say is more applicable to Christ followers, to Christians, to disciples of Jesus. Discipline and disciple are cognates. Take it from an old man. Train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. So now would probably be a good time for the requisite Lutheran disclaimer. Neither St. Paul nor I am saying that our godliness or its pursuit will get us into heaven. We're saved by grace through faith. And indeed, as we grow in faith, we grow in our awareness of the gap between our godliness and God's holiness. So growing in faith is not about getting better, improving like we might in foreign language skills, or better understanding the difference between DNA or RNA, or running a little faster or farther, or doing a few more push-ups. Growing in faith is about faith. Moreover, as a further disclaimer, growing in faith is not so much about measuring faith at all. With faith the size of a tiny mustard seed, you can move a mountain, Jesus said. It's not the size of our faith that matters for disciples. Rather, it is the object of our faith that matters. So strong faith in a weak bridge is likely to get you hurt. But even weak faith in a strong bridge can get you across. Disciples put their faith, even if it's sometimes weak, disciples put their faith in Jesus. Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Training to be godly, while this doesn't ignore how we might act or behave or think or speak, it has much more to do with connecting our lives to Jesus. And in one sense, this is easy. My burden is light, my yoke is easy, Jesus said. And He has done all the heavy lifting. He's carried our sin and our guilt to the cross. All that remains for us is to believe. And then if we are to be His disciples, to follow Him, to take up our cross and follow. Commenting on the exhortation of Jesus, take up your cross and follow me, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, wrote, when Christ bids a man to come and follow, He bids him to come and die. How's that for a training plan for godliness? Huh? A discipline for disciples. You want to follow Jesus? Come and die. This is not easy. And this may not be the theme for your church's next evangelism or outreach effort to the lost either, right? Are you looking for answers to your spiritual emptiness, or even just a nice place, a nice church to join? Come and die. Or the next stewardship drive, right? This year we're not asking you to increase your pledge. Instead, we just want you to come and die. On the other hand, maybe a faith not only worth living for, but even worth dying for? Well, that might get my attention. Dedicating your life to following Jesus, literally dedicating your life to be His disciple, is it worth the cost of discipleship? Come and die. If the motivation for this is merely self-improvement, well, then I have to tell you, training in godliness is probably not going to get you there. I mean, I've been working on this for years, and I haven't improved much, right, Tammy? I mean, you'll vouch for that. But the more you grow in faith, the more you sense the gap that separates us from God, which can only be bridged by the cross of Christ. If the motivation is a more meaningful life, a clearer reason for being, that's not bad. If arete is the pursuit of excellence for our minds and our bodies, we could add to that training of godliness for our spirits, right? In fact, St. Paul even uses that word arete, when he says to the Philippians, whatever is excellent, arete, whatever is excellent, think on such things. Body, mind, spirit. But there's still more. And even better yet. Reaching arete, excellence in mind, body, and spirit, to reach our full potential for all that God made us to be, that's a good thing, but it's not an end in itself. Because we were not made for ourselves. We're built for others. We are developed in mind and body and spirit for service to Christ in the church and in the world, serving Jesus by serving others. And I am all for arete, in the pursuit of excellence. Because reaching lower, while it might be easier, who wants to just settle for mediocrity? But once again, it is St. Paul who says, I will show you the most excellent way. Now, not arete. He doesn't use that word. He uses the word hyperbole, from which we get our word hyperbole, right? Not arete. St. Paul says, I'm going to show you the most excellent way. Hyperbole. Not as an exaggeration, right? But the all-surpassing way. The above and beyond all other ways to live life to the fullest. The most complete life imaginable. The most excellent way to get the most out of your intellectual and physical and spiritual gifts that God has given to you. The way to maximize your education in the most interesting and meaningful way. Yes, whatever is true and whatever is noble and whatever is right and whatever is pure and whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is praiseworthy or excellent, arete, think about those things. But don't just think. Aim for more. I will show you the most excellent hyperbole way. At Concordia, we say, for service to Christ and the church and the world, St. Paul boils it down to one single word. But he embeds that in one of the most beautiful chapters of all of Scripture. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, if I read books in Spanish and French, and translate the Bible from the original Greek and Hebrew, but I don't love people, give me the gong. It's just a lot of noise. If I understand all mysteries and knowledge, if I know all that there is to know about DNA and RNA and proteins and enzymes and molecules, if I can manipulate and I can edit genes, if I am more creative than Da Vinci, wiser than Franklin, smarter than Einstein, cleverer than Steve Jobs, but don't have love, forget the atomic, digital, or molecular revolution. My heart is what needs to change. If I'm strong enough to lift boulders and have a faith that can move mountains, but don't have love, I'm nothing. We live in a place and a time where love does not have a whole lot to do with it. Instead, we tend to surround ourselves with like-minded people, and then gather our news from like-minded sources, and then we villainize and we demonize those who take a different view because they see things from another perspective. And even in the church, we're prone to factionalism, not just between denominations, but with our own fellowship. We're plagued by party spirit and mistrust and lack of love. And rarely will we extend ourselves to care for others, to hear what they think, to put the best construction on things, or heaven forbid, to meet somebody in the middle. If the old camp song was true, they will know we are Christians by our love. It's no wonder the churches are in decline and Christianity diminishing in esteem. And we might attempt to redefine love with the idea that convincing others that they are wrong is really what love requires. Clang, gong. Love attaches no strings. Love remains firm at the core, but is soft at the edges. Love allows truth and falsehood to grapple because the truth does not hang in the balance by whatever string we try to attach. Service to Christ in the church and in the world. Faith, hope, love. The greatest of these is love. My own journey in Christian higher education began at St. John's College. This last lecture concludes with a reference to the disciple for whom that college was named. St. John talks a lot about love. At St. John's College, I first learned that God so loved the world, including me, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him wouldn't perish, but would have everlasting life, that God loves us in Christ with an unchanging, everlasting love. And ever since that time, I've been learning about the implications of that promise for my own life, which the same St. John describes in this way: "Beloved, let us love one another, for everyone who loves is born of God and knows God, and he that does not love does not know God, for God is love." There's a story about St. John. He was the only one of Christ's 12 disciples to live a long life and to die presumably of natural causes. The others, they all took up their own crosses, even though discipleship meant for each of them literally to come and die. John instead evidently was sent into exile on the Isle of Patmos, where the gospel and the epistle writer penned his apocalypse, the book of Revelation. Other followers gathered to be near him because the disciple whom Jesus loved was loved by many. And it was said that near the end of his life, the wizened old man would preach the same message over and over again. He would stand up, look at his congregation, and he would simply say, "My dear little children, let us love one another." So why the same message over and over again? Was it a sign of his dotage, his once fertile mind no longer able to plumb deep meaning or to assemble together more complex thoughts? Or was it because while it is easy to say the same old words to the same old mission statement do not easily sink in and are even more difficult to live out? Patrick was never exiled to Patmos. My many years at Concordia have been entirely voluntary, winter and all. More like Siberia than Patmos sometimes, anyway. Seriously though, I have been blessed to be here beyond what I ever would have imagined as a young college student. So with our mission once more in mind, I've been privileged this evening and eager to encourage you to pursue arete, excellence in mind and body and spirit. But I'm even more determined to remind you of the most excellent way. And so I guess if it was good enough for the old evangelist repeatedly to preach before he died, surely it's a good way for an old president to preach and conclude with, before he retires. my dear little children, let us love one another. Thank you.
President Ferry, those were minutes well spent. For every single one of us here, for those watching on the live stream, for those who are yet to hear it, they're going to be blessed. Thank you for these years and this time and this night to bless us. God bless you all. Have a wonderful night.
Good night. Thanks, Ryan.